Jews and blacks, black Africans is what I mean by that, were brought together because of one signal feature, which is that they both had an unchanging face. You can always tell them, you can go back through history and you can see this unchanging African Jewish face. It wasn't applied to other people. It wasn't applied to other people. It wasn't applied to other people. They were fascinated by the idea that Jews could be black. Okay. Now, why were they so fascinated? Their fascination actually rather mirrored my own fascination. So I felt a personal involvement in this. I couldn't really understand, for instance, why, me and my colleagues had been laboring in the groves of academe for years when I wrote my first book about the Ethiopian Jew. It wasn't my first book, it was a book about the Ethiopian Jews. And all of a sudden, my stuff was on the front pages of all the newspapers in the world, pretty much. It had fantastic publicity. And similarly, when I did my first book on the Lemba, I finished up on 60 minutes. And, it was on the front page of the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, all over the place. Fantastic, incredible publicity. Why? Why is it, I thought, that black Jews are so deeply troubling to Western sensibilities? It really puzzled me for a long time. And it was interesting, it was fascinating to see that Enlightenment scholars at the end of the 18th century were equally puzzled. And the reason that they were puzzled, why were they puzzled? They were puzzled because they didn't know how they became black. And they thought that maybe it was a question of climate. And there were lots of people who would come out and say, yeah, if you take an Englishman and you plant him in Central Africa, leave him there for 10, 15, 20 years, he'll turn black. So this would be the explanation. And so this was a proof, if you like, this was a great proof that climate is the thing that determines race. And this fed into a much wider debate, which Bonnie, I think, can introduce.
I think this leads us to the discussion of the difference. In the book, you use the phrase monogenism and polygenism. Is this the question you're looking for, Dr. Parfit?
Yes, I think that's exactly right.
Please explain what they mean and how they shed light on today's issues of race relations.
Well, in the same way that over the last 6 months, despite everything else that is going on in the world, we have been riven with an international debate about race, which one might think to be unprecedented, but it's not, because from the last couple of decades, probably of the 18th century, right through until the Second World War, there was an ongoing debate which was absolutely at the heart of intellectual interest throughout Europe and the United States and other Western countries about the origins of mankind. And so the two main arguments went like this pretty much, that either the Judeo-Christian Muslim idea of Adam and Eve was true, in which case we're all one human family, or, and this is called monogenism. Monogenism means that, there was one father and one mother of mankind, and we are ultimately all the same. Or that there were different founder events in different parts of the world, and the different races were the product of quite different ancient ancestors, and that the races concerned could not possibly, under any circumstances, change. Races were immutable, both in terms of their physical, biological properties, but also in terms of their spiritual or intellectual capacities. The racial age, according to me, and I've, the book I've been thinking about writing is not quite the book that I'm writing at the moment. The next book, or the book after that, will be looking at the racial age from a certain point of view, and I could talk about that if you'd like me to now. But do stop me if you think it's going off on a tangent. The racial age really starts at the end of the 17th century with the work of a particular French medical man called Francois Bernier. And he was the first person to suggest that the world was divided into races. Nobody thought in those terms before Francois Bernier at all. And it seems very, very odd. There's always a great discussion, let's say, among American historians about, what comes first in America? Is it race or is it slavery? And the truth is that when slavery started, nobody was thinking in terms of race. So it could be that that slavery, in a way, developed into racial prejudice, or it could be that sort of pre-racial prejudice, which is a kind of generalized prejudice on the basis of the metaphor of black, had some impact upon people and their treatment of African slaves when they got to the Americas. But it's a big kind of intellectual discussion. And so the racial age, anyway, starts around the end of the 17th century. It was developed through the 18th century. All of the kind of different gradations of race and the pyramids of race were developed in the second half of the 18th century, and then really became standard thinking by the middle of the 19th century. And the people doing all of this kind of racial structuring, they were all polygenists, because they all felt that race was the most incredibly important thing in the world. It was more important than religion. It was more important than history. It was more important than politics. It really was all of those things. And it wasn't that these people were particularly, bad or nasty people. It was what some of them were, by the way, but it was really what they believed. And on the other hand, you had the monogenists who believed, no, everybody's essentially the same. Some are more developed for historical, economic reasons and so on. But underneath the skin, we're all the same people. We all go back to Adam and Eve. And so why then, all of a sudden, do the people that we're all interested in, this group, everybody here is interested in the question of Jews, as we say, of color throughout the world. I mean, that's one of these are the groups, Kulanu and me, we've been very interested in. And they've been marginal. They're still very, very marginal. They're very, very marginal in terms of, let's say, Jewish historians, in terms of the state of Israel, in terms of what people are thinking about in the kind of general, Jewish journals in the United States and newspapers, occasionally an article here, an article there. It's marginal stuff. However, at the end of the 18th century and for the first half of the 19th century, Jews of color were not marginal. They were mainstream preoccupations of people. That's something which I'm the first person to point out. It was interesting for racial theorists, number of reasons. One of the reasons is that you've got, for the first time, the idea that Jews are multicolored, right? And so that in itself is kind of interesting. But the underlying thing is the proof that this provides to the monogenists. And they took up the cause of all of the black, brown, Jewish communities throughout the world, like it was the most fabulous, fabulous thing that they could imagine in support of their own ideas. And they would spend their times traveling the world and looking for new black Jewish communities, and they could bring these back and feed them into the racial kind of machine. And it was simply this, that if Jews can change racial look, if they can change face, if they can change color, as they did in the case of, apparently in the case of the Jews of Loango, or as they did in the case of the black Jews of Cochin in Kerala, or as they apparently did in the case of the Bnei Israel of Bombay in Western India, or as it apparently did in the case of Jews who were living at the time in the Sahara, or as it appeared to be with Jewish communities who, according to travelers, were at the time living in the Jordan Valley, about whom I sadly know not nearly as much as I would like to know, and various other groups. All of these kind of black Jewish groups, brown, they were all kind of dragooned as part of the holy crusade of proving the unified origins of mankind. What a noble thing that turned out to be. And of course, with Darwin, that pretty much marks the end of polygenism, except that even today there are genetic scientists who fiddle around with the proof in such a way that it looks as if there are races and that they're kind of significantly different from each other, but it really is not the case. And the Nazis, of course, were deeply, deeply, deeply wedded to the polygynist paradigm, and particularly the idea that races could not change. So the Jews, they constructed as being a sort of mishmash, almost an unrace, but deeply dangerous to the racial purity of the Reich, but unchanging. They'd been unchanged and unchanging for thousands of years, as indeed had the Aryans and other racial groupings.
So should we go to the question about conflation? What does conflation mean? Were there different kinds of conflation of Jews and blacks over time? Or should we go to the question of looking at your slides?
Well, let me quickly just deal, because the conflation is in the title of my book. And I think just to say what I mean by it would be a good introduction really to the slides. And Bonnie sort of mentioned very kindly a chapter in that 2013 book. And there was nothing original about that. There's a great scholar by the name of Sander Gilman, who really is the father of all studies about the perceptions of the body of the Jew. He's an extraordinary scholar, and I owe a huge amount to everything that he's written, and I admire him enormously. And so a long time ago, he wrote that there was a kind of medieval perception that Jews were black. And there's plenty of proof that within Europe, the Jews were considered to be kind of black. There are many images of Jews being black. And even if they weren't black, they were not even slightly black. They were kind of considered to be black in one way or another. So blackness and Jews really went hand in hand. If you read his work, or if you read my work, and particularly if you read this new book, you will see the multitude of examples of it. And if you go, for instance, into the marginalia, the illustrations in English or European prayer books in the 13th and 14th centuries, you frequently see hook-nosed Jews wearing Jewish hats and with black faces. So the idea that Jews were black was definitely there, before the Enlightenment period. And
So let's go to the slides now.
just a sec, because I just need to say, too, in the 19th century, the idea of Jewish blackness was reinforced by the discovery of all of these actual black Jews in India and Africa, all over the place. And by 1850, the main racial theorists of the day started saying that, yes, actually, Jews are Negroes. Negroes, in some way, are also Jews. This is the conflation. It's partly political, it's partly metaphorical, and it's very, very significantly biological. I'm ready to go to the slides if you think it's a good minute.
No, it's like picturing the Jews as chameleons of some sort, right? They like pick up the identity of the place where they live or something.
Yes, I mean, I think that's certainly part of 20th century anti-Semitic discourses that they take on the colorings of wherever they are, and you can never tell a Jew. And one of the great problems the Nazis had was that, according to Nazi theory, you could tell a Jew by looking at him. A Jew is obvious. He's physically obvious. He's black, for a start. And he's got a Jewish face. He's got a Jewish body. He's got Jewish ears. He's got Jewish hair. He's got Jewish everything. Except when it comes to it, you couldn't actually tell the difference between a Gentile and a Jew in the area of the Third Reich. And all of the thousands, tens of thousands of studies that were done measuring noses and measuring ears and measuring, forehead slant, all of the kinds of things that they were doing in the first half of the 19th century and even into the 20th century, they proved to come up with a single thing that would help in the identification of Jews. So at a time when the Nazis desperately needed to be able to identify Jews so they could murder them, they didn't actually have any way of doing it physically. They had to rely upon documents, and they had to rely upon spies, and they had to rely upon the concierge at the bottom of the stairs who said, Monsieur Cohen, il est en bas. Oh, that sort of thing. But when it came to taking somebody in, looking at them in the face and saying, yes, that guy is Jewish and we can prove it because of X, Y, and Z, they couldn't do it at all, and they desperately tried to do it throughout the period of the Third Reich. And so all kinds of studies were done to try and prove that the ears or the nose or whatever it might be, blood types was a favorite for a while until it was shown that there were no blood types that were unique to Jews at all, etc., etc.
Okay, let's go to the slides now.
So this is just the slide which we don't really need now. This is just showing where Loango is, and after the initial mention in 1777 of the black Jews of Loango, there was a German expedition exactly 100 years later to the area of Loango Coast, and there are three big fat German tomes that emerged from this scientific visit, and there we have a lot more information about them. Sadly, very little is known, if anything, about their cultural or religious practices, but we do know that they were there. They were exactly where the slave back in the 1770s had said that they were. They had a specific culture. They were relatively well off. They were traders, etc., etc. So actually a very, very interesting community. And what is deeply fascinating is that, as my dear friend Nathan DeVere, who is the greatest of scholars on the subject of the Jews of Africa. Wonderful, wonderful scholar, and you should certainly be looking him up and buying his books. He's a great, great man. He's traveled everywhere, and he's fearless. So he's told me about Judaizing movements in and around the area of the Jewish community of Luango in the present day. And it would be really interesting to see if there's any connection. But the latest piece of information I have about the community is something coming from the 1950s or early 1960s, which suggests that they moved inland towards the end of the 19th century, probably, and they went to the edge of the rain forest, a little to the north of the purple mauve area of Luango here, and intermarried with pygmies in the area of the, as I said, of the rainforest. You know, if there's any connection between them and Judaizing manifestations today, I'd be really interested. I don't know if there are, but future scholars will be able to tell us perhaps in due course. But it would be very interesting to do a DNA study on that group if they're still there. So that's that slide. So this is one of the kind of interesting depictions. This is Caiaphas appearing, Jesus appearing before the high priest Caiaphas, and then the people in the back are Jews. As you can see, they're black and they've got hooked noses, and they're looking a bit sinister. And these kind of stereotypical Jewish faces are totally usual, if you like, in the illustrations to be found in prayer books in England. And there are a couple of wonderful books written by scholars. One, Kaplan, fabulous book, which is looking particularly at the way in which Jews are represented in medieval texts. Pictorial texts, or rather illustrated texts. And here's another one. It's a beautiful thing, which would have been part of the robes of an important priest, probably a bishop or something. And it's embroidered. And it's if you're interested, next time you're in the V&A in London, you can try and go and see it. And what you see is Jesus carrying the cross, and what we have is a black person beating him. And given that there are no Africans mentioned in the Old Testament, at least with respect to the period of Jesus, nothing in this period. The assumption is that this may be a black Jew, and that would be consistent with the images that I've already mentioned.
The CT scan has one more surprise for Alejandro: Shammai's ethnicity.
Well, they have just told me that Shammai had Nubian features, which means that their ruling family was probably Nubian, and that was unexpected.
Examining Shammai's anatomy closely, the thickness of his bones and the shape of his nasal cavity, the anthropologists think he was a black African, likely from neighboring Nubia. A huge revelation that challenges the prevailing image of the Egyptian ruling class.
We always thought the ancient Egyptian elite were Mediterranean type, and in this sense, Shammai is representing the society of the frontier, in which different ethnic groups were mixed. At the end, it doesn't matter the color of your skin. Shammai was Egyptian.
One of the interesting things is the question of the face, and in the 18th century, a new science of physiognomy was formed, and through the face, initially, the idea was that you can, if you really understand the face and if you understand the science of the face, the real science of the face, then you'll be able to choose a husband or a wife suitably. You can choose a servant. You can select a doctor who's going to be helpful and honest. And going through life, as long as you understand the face, you'll be okay. You can select people according to your understanding of what the face is telling you. And this is a big deal for 100 years at least. And nobody would really take it very seriously now, although there are new movements using computerized images and DNA and stuff, which are looking at physiognomy of flesh. But this was taken up by race theorists, and so the idea came that every race has got its own face, and that face is absolutely unchangeable. And so time and time again, you know, Jews and blacks, black Africans is what I mean by that, were brought together because of one signal feature, which is that they both had an unchanging face. You can always tell them, you can go back through history and you can see this unchanging African Jewish face. It wasn't applied to other people.
Where am I actually from? I mean, I know I'm American, but where my DNA is from. And so I said, well, let me take my DNA test. It was a 23andMe DNA test. And I took the test and I was shocked when I saw the results. It came back and it showed that I was actually a direct descendant of the Pharaoh Ramses III. And I knew nothing of the pharaohs. Didn't know much about Egypt, but everything you hear about, you know, Bible stories and things like that. So for me, it was a huge shock, and that's how I found out about it.
Wow. So obviously you took it deeper and deeper. You saw all of these synchronicities in looking at images of the pharaoh, how much you and even your brother look like them, and your own company has like an eye logo that looks like the Eye of Horus, unconnected to any of this. So what did this open up for you in terms of your own knowledge and learning about this?
I remember I was actually laying in my bed on Christmas Day, 2021, and I was going through my 23andMe DNA test, and that's when I saw that I was connected to the Pharaoh Ramses III. And again, I knew nothing of this situation. And so I looked up a sculpture of the Pharaoh Ramses III, and when I saw the sculpture, I literally screamed. And my wife said, Dexter, what's wrong? I said, this guy from 4,000 years ago, we look just alike.
And it was applied to these two groups. And I didn't say before, but I should have done, was that through all of the kind of medieval literature, which is beginning to interest itself in the possibilities of races. I mean, this is really before the beginning of the racial age, as I would understand it. You know, there are two groups that are considered to be completely unique in the history of the world. One are Negroes, as they called them at the time, and one were Jews. So it's blacks and Jews who were the outliers as far as European thought went. And so this image of Memnon in the British museums was very much discussed at the time because it appeared to everybody to incorporate the classical Jewish face. And race theorists went to the places in the East End of London where there were a lot of Jews, and they would come back absolutely flabbergasted that wherever they went, they saw time and time and time again an identical face to that of this Egyptian.
What's your thoughts? Please be respectful with your comments. Also, please click the like, click the notification bell, and subscribe to this channel.
Listen, Genesis chapter 11 verse 10 explains the genealogy of Shem. Shem was a black man in Africa. If you repeat this back, Genesis 14 verse 13 Abraham steps on the scene. Being a descendant of Shem, which is a fact, means Abraham too was Abraham, born in the city of a black man, called Nimrod, grandson of Ham. Ham had 4 sons. One was named Canaan. Here, let me do some explaining. Abraham, Isaac was Jacob had 12 sons, for real, and these were the children of Israel. According to Genesis chapter 10, these were the children of Israel. According to Genesis chapter 10, these were the children of Israel. According to Genesis chapter 10.